automakers have been developing high-performance EVs like this Mustang Mach-E GT and that Genesis GV60 performance, which both offer more than 400 horsepower and instant acceleration.
All that power and performance looks good in commercials and marketing campaigns, but Canadians need to know how they deal with this kind of weather.
We had these things in the dry earlier this week, and now it's time to test them in real Canadian weather.
Hey, did you get the seat heaters warmed up for me there?
I'm all toasty and ready for you, buddy.
All right, let's go.
John, we're here in a $90,000 Ford Mustang Mach-E GT Performance, which has 418 kilometers of range, which isn't too bad.
Yeah, it's also got a really nice 480 horsepower and 600 pound-feet of torque, which allows it to accelerate to 100 kilometers per hour in 3.5 seconds. This thing is fast.
You ready to test that number out right here in the snow?
Please no, Sammy. I want to make it home to my family.
We've got some winter tires, come on. Actually, I will say that the winter tires are a little bit of a downside here. We've got some Pirelli Scorpions on these, and they're big tires, 20 inches, which could be hard to find in some situations. But I'm not so sold on these tires, but I will say, overall, the drive is the star of the Mustang Mach-E GT. This car is a lot of fun to drive. It has a ton of acceleration, and for enthusiasts who really want to get going and show off their speed, I think the Mach-E GT really pulls that off.
Yeah, the other thing that's really nice about the Mach-E GT is the ride. The ride's firm, but it's not crashy, so it's not terribly uncomfortable. Yeah, you'll feel the bumps and move around a bit, but it settles down nice and quickly, and so it also cruises really nicely on the highway, whether you're in Blue Cruise or not.
Right. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the overall drive, because it's a little less versatile feeling than the Genesis GV60, which has more drive modes. It has like custom modes. It has different regen settings, and I don't have any of that here in the Mach-E GT. I have these three vaguely named drive modes: Whisper, Engage, and Unbridled, which I don't think really explain what's going on with the car. I'm driving in Whisper mode. I really would have just loved a snow mode for situations like this.
Yeah, that's actually a good point of differentiation with the Genesis, because this Mustang simply has no chill. It's all go. It never wants to relax. It kind of needs a snow mode for these conditions to really dial down the acceleration, but hey, it's a Mustang, I guess, right? So they got to live up to their reputation of something a little bit wild and aggressive, especially here in the GT edition.
Absolutely. But while we're talking about changing drive modes, all of that is done through this really big infotainment screen, which is cool to look at. It's very responsive, but I actually find it a bit too minimalist. There's not a lot of hard buttons in this cabin, and the ones that we do have feel a little flimsy and cheap, which I think is not worthy of the $90,000 price tag of this car.
Yeah, that's the thing. My reaction to the interior is, I got into it, I love the way it looks. There's some really neat uses of materials. I like the big, tall, vertical screens. But then once you start to feel around, there's some cheap components, especially the main volume knob on the touch screen. Just feels really, really flimsy. And some of the other stuff just seemed like cheap Ford part spin.
Yeah, just listen to the hollow plastic back here behind the seats. There's some flex back there as well. So it could be better for sure.
Yeah, but it is a Ford. It's a mainstream brand, so it's got a luxury price tag, but it's not strictly luxury. And really, it seems like where they put the money into development was into this chassis and the platform. And I feel like they've delivered on that promise.
I think you're right. There's also some decent technology in here. We were talking about Blue Cruise, which is the Ford driver assistance feature, the highway kind of assist. And you were saying that the following distance can be very close, which prevents people cutting you off, which happens all the time in these systems.
Yeah, if you're a city driver and you like to use your adaptive cruise in rush hour traffic, a lot of the systems will tend to have a huge gap. And that just means that it's kind of like everybody's cutting in front of you, and it gets pretty frustrating, which takes away the point of these adaptive cruise systems. What I liked about the Ford was that close is close, and then you can add distance as you want to, depending on your preferences, which is in stark contrast to the stereo system, which is pretty much making your ears bleed by volume 5.
God, yeah, 5 is too loud, and I don't want to know how far this thing dials up to. But now we're driving this car in the snow, and there's a couple of things that I can mention that I like and I don't like. First of all, it is a very capable vehicle in this snow. It actually feels, really confidence-inspiring. It's not too slippery. It doesn't feel too heavy. You don't really run out of steam when you hit the brakes. It doesn't kind of wiggle out behind you, which is something that we feel in the other cars. And I've got to say, I really like the rear windshield wiper, which Genesis doesn't have.
Yeah, that's a bit of a pain point with both the Hyundai and the Kia and the Genesis GV60 that all share that Hyundai eGMP platform. But let's hop into the GV60 now and see how it's doing both in the snow and what some of its high points are.
Absolutely. I can't wait.
All right, Sammy, we're switched over here to the Genesis GV60. The seat heaters are going, and one of my favorite things is the Genesis GV60 also has seat coolers, which is a godsend in summer when these black seats would get piping hot.
We're not thinking about it yet.
No,
but we'll be grateful
to be prepared.
Yeah,
We're talking about year-round cars here. We want to be able to drive these in all seasons and conditions. The Genesis GV60 is also a value deal, but it's got a much narrower window than the Mustang, which starts in the 50,000s and goes all the way up to that 90. The Genesis starts at 71,000, and this top performance trim is 79,000. And there's no extra freight and PDI on top of that, since Genesis includes that price in the price.
That's really handy. You don't need to worry about any add-ons or anything like that. And I even think they, can deliver the car to you when needed, which is cool. Now, one of the interesting things to talk about when it comes to these two vehicles is that the Genesis has a fairly limited range in comparison to the Mustang of 378 kilometers compared to 418 in the Mustang.
Yeah, that's it's not that big of a difference, especially when both of them are reduced in the winter weather, but the Genesis has the advantage of charging speed. It's got a slightly faster charging setup, and it can charge it up to 350 kilowatts charging speeds from the chargers, whereas the Mustang Mach-E is limited to about 150 kilowatts. So
right.
It won't charge as quickly, and the big selling point for the GV60 on charging is that it can go from 10 to 80% in 18 minutes if it's on max charging, although
who knows?
To be honest, we rarely ever see those kind of charging rates. Even the rapid chargers often display only about 40-50 kilowatts of charging speed.
Now we're here in the performance version of the GV60, which has 429 horsepower and 446 pound-feet of torque.
But 483 horsepower in boost mode.
Hey, that brings it way closer to the Mustang, but I've got to admit, this car doesn't feel as engaging or immediate or thrilling to drive as the Mustang.
Yeah, you put it in boost mode and it launches. It's kind of like it's crazy town kind of acceleration. We don't need that much acceleration in this weather for sure. But where it's disappointing is how it handles in some of the corners and turns. Because when we were driving the other day and the roads were clear and we took turns, we started testing its performance, it really wobbled around when you did quick side-to-side maneuvers, like a slalom type of action.
Yeah.
So it was really disappointing in that respect.
It just feels like there's too much power for the chassis at times. The vehicle kind of can get really lost, in terms of acceleration and performance and handling, and I think that's a detriment. Honestly, it also has very harsh suspension, seemingly for no benefit. And this is in the comfort mode, and it feels like you're rocking around, you're hitting some bumps a little too hard.
Yeah, the suspension is definitely a miss for this vehicle, but one of the things that I think is a hit is the interior design. It just looks really nice in here, whereas in other Genesis vehicles, like the GV70, I just didn't like the look of it. But this one, I kind of feel the way that they've balanced things out and the trim pieces they've added and the nice touches, the visual touches, it works for me.
And while it has a smaller infotainment screen setup, I actually found it easier to use. The touchscreen it works, and there's also a rotary knob to control other things as well, so you don't get too distracted by taking your hands off or your eyes off the road. And there's also a bunch of really cool features that are worth talking about. There's a fingerprint reader. There's, I think, facial recognition in the B-pillar. There's all sorts of really neat things like a self-parking or remote parking feature. There's also, let's say, all these customizations that you can make for the drive mode. We mentioned that earlier, but there's also, you can change the way the car sounds from inside the cabin, and there's different levels of regenerative braking. It's just full of all kinds of cool technology and things that make you feel like you're getting something for your money.
Yeah, well, the cabin is fancy and high-tech. The practicality loses out to the Mustang a bit. It's not a very big cargo area, and the rear seat seems a little bit tighter and the roofline lower for when you're leaning in or trying to put your kids in the back seat or anything like that.
Yeah, specifically, there's also no front trunk available in the GV60. As a result, it only has 680 liters of storage, while the Mustang has over 800. And then when you fold down the rear seats, the Genesis has 1,550 liters, while the Mustang has a total of 1,690, which is really useful.
It is a slightly larger vehicle, so it's something that you'd expect from that car. Yeah, so the Mustang is practical, despite also being the performance choice in this comparison. So, yeah, the final point I wanted to talk about is kind of like what we've just seen here today in this weather. And the Genesis has a really cool feature that you can increase or decrease the regenerative braking using paddles on the steering wheel. But the interesting thing is, that just changes how much you can use the one pedal driving. No matter which setting it's in, whether you're lifting off the gas pedal and pressing on the brake a little bit or just lifting the gas pedal, as soon as the regenerative braking hits, it causes the car to shimmy a little bit, which is truly disconcerting. And the interesting thing about these two vehicles is they're both wearing Pirelli Scorpion winter tires. So on that front, they're somewhat equal. And so no, it's not a tire difference between the two cars. It's just something where this thing is possibly set up just a little bit too tight, a little bit too tense, and so it reacts or overreacts in these snowy conditions. And that's when I've actually turned on the specific snow mode that's available through the touchscreen.
All right, John, I think I've had about my fill of this winter weather. Let's go close this video up. I've had all my fun.
Let's go park somewhere and not have to drive around on these sketchy conditions anymore. Thank you very much.
Let's get some hot chocolate and warm up. Performance EVs like these can work in the snow if you go a little slow and you know what you're doing. Personally, I really love driving the Mach-E in the dry, and I found the Genesis EV to be full of features and technology.
Yeah, neither of these is fantastic in the snow, but definitely for people that want a little bit more performance in their EV, the Mustang Mach-E, especially in this GT trim, is the way to go. If you want that luxury and also decent value, this Genesis GV60 wins the comparison on those areas. But if I had to recommend a car for Canadians as a year-round EV, I would say take a long look at the Hyundai Ioniq 5, which we've been testing in a long-term test. So I can tell you that it deals with all the conditions really well, whether it's snow or dry, and it's got enough features to feel like you're not being shortchanged, and it's also just a fantastic value compared to these two with great range and features that Canadians will be sure to come to love.
All right, John, that's enough about the Ioniq 5 that isn't even here today. When it comes to the two cars we've been driving, I think I'd take the Mustang Mach-E, which is way more fun to drive. For Driving.ca, I'm Sammy Hajjasad.
And I'm Jonathan Yarconi. Don't forget to check out Driving.ca for more EV stories, news, and reviews.